please welcome Bruce Schneier.
Hey, good morning. Thanks for coming out. So let's talk about the tax system as an IT security problem. It has code. It's just a series of algorithms that take an input, tax information for the year, and produce some output, the amount of tax owed. It's incredibly complex code. Consists of laws, government laws, tax authority rulings, judicial decisions, lawyer opinions. There are bugs in the code. There are mistakes in how the law is written, how it's interpreted. Some of those bugs are vulnerabilities. And attackers look for exploitable vulnerabilities. We call them tax loopholes. Right? Attackers exploit these vulnerabilities. We call it tax avoidance. And vulnerabilities, loopholes, are everywhere in the tax code. And actually, there are thousands of black hat security researchers that examine every line of the tax code looking for vulnerabilities. We call them tax attorneys. So some of these bugs are mistakes. In the 2017 tax law, there was an actual mistake, a typo, that categorized military death benefits as earned income. And as a result, surviving family members got unexpected tax bills of $10,000 or more. Some of these are emergent properties. So there is I'm going to read it, the double Irish with a Dutch sandwich. So this is the trick that lets US companies like Google and Apple avoid paying US tax. And actually, Google is possibly being prosecuted for that right now. Some of these vulnerabilities are deliberately created in the tax code by lobbyists trying to gain some advantage for their industry. Sometimes a legislator knows about it, sometimes they don't. So I guess this is analogous to a government sneaking a programmer into Microsoft to drop a vulnerability in Windows. All right, so this is my big idea. We here in our community have developed some very effective techniques to deal with code, to deal with tech. We started by examining purely technical systems. Increasingly, we study socio-technical systems. Can our expertise in IT security transfer to broader social systems, like the tax code, like the system we use to choose our elected officials, like the market economy? Is our way of thinking, our analytical framework, our procedural mindset, valuable in this broader context? Can we hack society? And actually, more importantly, can we help secure the systems that make up society? All right, so back to the tax code. We know how to fix this problem before the code is deployed. Secure development processes, source code audits. How do we do that for the tax code? Like, who does it? Who pays for it? And what about those deliberate vulnerabilities? We know how to fix the problem with running code. Right? Vulnerability finding by white hat researchers, bug bounties, patching. How do you patch the tax code? Right? How do you create laws and policies that implement the notion of patching? I mean, right now, passing tax legislation is a big deal politically. And here's the big question: can we design a security system to deal with bugs and vulnerabilities in the tax code, and then build procedures to implement it? So security technologists have a certain way of looking at the world. It's systems thinking with an adversarial mindset. I've called it a hacker mindset. We think about how systems fail, how they can be made to fail, and we think about everything in this way. And we've developed what I think is a unique skill set. Understanding technical systems with the human dimensions, right? Understanding socio-technical systems, thinking about these systems in an adversarial mindset, adaptive, malicious adversaries, and understanding the security of complex adaptive systems. and understanding iterative security solutions. This way of thinking generalizes, and it's my contention that the worlds of tech and policy are converging, that the tax code is now becoming actual code, and that what once purely systems are increasingly socio-technical systems. And as society's systems become more complex, as the world looks more like a computer, our security skills become more broadly applicable. So that's basically my talk. It's preliminary work. I have a lot of examples, a lot of detail. I'm going to throw a bunch of stuff at you. And I want to convince you that we have this unique framework for solving security problems. And there are new domains we can apply them to. I guess I want to put a caveat here in the beginning. I don't want to say that tech can fix everything. Right? This isn't technological solutionism. This isn't Silicon Valley saving the world. This is a way that I think we can blend tech and policy in a new way. All right, so to do this, we need to broaden some definitions. Let's talk about a hack. A hack is something a system allows, but is unwanted and unanticipated by the system designers. More than that, it is an exploitation of the system. Something desired by the attacker at the expense of some other part of the system. So in his memoirs, Edward Snowden writes that the US intelligence community hacked the Constitution in order to justify mass surveillance. Right? We can argue whether that's true or not, but everyone here intuitively knows what he means by that. Other examples of hacks. So lack of standing is a hack the NSA used to avoid litigating the constitutionality of their actions. Vulnerability, of course, is that there's a body of law out of reach of conventional judicial review. Using the All Writs Act against Apple, as FBI did in 2016, is a hack. Right? Maybe you think it's a good hack. All hacks aren't bad, but it is definitely an unintended and unanticipated use of a 1789 law. So this all makes sense to me in my head. And my guess is it makes some sense to you, but is it useful? I think it is. I think this way of looking at the world can usefully inform policy decisions. Let's talk about hacking the legislative process. Bills now are so complicated that no one who votes on them truly understands them. You just add one sentence to a bill, it makes references to other laws, and the combination results in some specific outcome unknown to most everyone. And there's a whole industry dedicated to engineering these unanticipated consequences. It sounds like spaghetti code. We could think of VC funding as a hack of market economics. Right? So markets are based on knowledgeable buyers making decisions amongst competing products. Right? The pressure to sell to those buyers depresses prices and incents innovation. That's basically the mechanic of the market. VC funding hacks that process. The external injection of money means that companies don't have to compete in the traditional manner. The best strategy for a startup is to take enormous risks to be successful, because otherwise they're dead. And they can destroy without providing viable alternatives, as long as they have that external funding source to do it. And this is a vulnerability in the market system, which makes Uber a hack. Right? VC funding means they can lose 41 cents on every dollar until they destroy the taxi industry. WeWork is a hack. I guess was a hack. Are they still around? Right? Their business model loses $2.6 billion a year. We could look at money in politics as a similar example. Right? The injection of private cash hacks the democratic process. To think about markets more generally, they're really based on three things: information, choice, and agency. And they are all under attack. Right? Complex product offerings obscure information. Right? Just try to compare prices of cell phone programs or credit cards. Monopolies remove our ability to choose. Right? Products and services we can't reasonably live without deprive us of agency. There's probably an entire talk on this. And so metaphors matter here. Right? Most people don't consider our democratic process or the market as socio-technical systems. And I think this is similar to us only thinking in terms of tech systems. Right? Remember 15 years ago when we thought our security domain ended at the keyboard and chair? Right? Today we know that all computer systems are actually complex socio-technical systems, that they are embedded in systems people say nested in broader social systems. And it turns out all modern systems are like that too, just as the balance between socio and technical are different. There's a difference between determinism and non-determinism that I think matters here. Right? A bug in software is deterministic. Who gets elected? World events, social trends. Those are non-deterministic. Users are non-deterministic. Hackers are non-deterministic. Determinism is a majority condition in computer systems. We in security deal with non-determinism all the time. And it's a majority condition in social systems. I think we need to generalize non-determinism better, both in our systems and in social systems. Right, also, what do we actually mean by a hack? In our world, in the computer security, we tend to work with conventional systems created for some purpose by someone. Social systems aren't really like that. Right? They evolve. New purposes emerge. A hack can be an emergent property. It's not clear whether they're good or bad. There's a lot of perspective that matters here. Right? If VC funding is simply a way for the wealthy to invest their money, then it's the market working as intended. And it's not obvious to me how to handle this generalization. Another concept that generalizes. Changes in the threat model. So we know how this works. A system is created for some particular threat model, and then things change. Maybe its usage changes, technology changes, circumstance changes, or just a change in scale that causes a change in kind. So the old security assumptions are no longer true, right? The threat model has changed, but then no one notices it. So the system kind of slides into insecurity. I've heard political scientists call this concept drift. So let's talk about a change in the threat model. Too big to fail. So this is a concept that some corporations are so big and so important to the functioning of our society that they can't be allowed to fail. In 2008, US government bailed out several major banks to the tune of $700 billion because of their very bad business decisions, because they were too big to fail. Right? The fear was if the government didn't do that, the banks would collapse and take the economy with it. The banks were literally too big to be allowed to fail. Not the first time. 1979, US government bailed out Chrysler. Back then it was national security. They were building the M1 Abrams tank. It was jobs, saving 700,000 jobs, saving suppliers and the whole ecosystem. And there was an auto trade war going on with Japan at the time. Right? So this is an emergent vulnerability. When the mechanisms of the market economy were invented, nothing could ever be that big. No one could conceive of anything being that big. Right? Our economic system is based on an open market and relies on the fact that the cost of failing is paid by the entity failing, and that guides behavior. That doesn't work if you're too big to fail. Right? A company that's trading off private gains and public losses is not going to make the same decisions. And this perturbs market economics. We we can look at threat model changes in our political system, right? Election security. The U.S. system of securing elections is basically based on representatives of the two opposing parties sitting together and making sure none of them does anything bad. Right? That made perfect sense against the threats in the mid-1800s. It is useless against modern threats against elections. The apportionment of representatives. Right? Gerrymandering is much more effective with modern surveillance systems. And like markets, democracy is based on information, choice, and agency, and all three are under attack. So another thing we need to generalize is who the attackers and defenders are. So we know that the term attacker and defender doesn't carry moral weight. Right? All security systems are embedded in some broader social concept. We could have the police attacking and criminals defending. We could have criminals attacking and the police defending. To us, it's basically all the same tech. But normally, our attackers and defenders are in different groups. This isn't true with the tax code or political gerrymandering. The attackers are members of the same society that's defending. And the defenders are society as a whole, and the attackers are some subset of them. Or worse, it's two groups trying to gain the same system. So each trying to immunize the system to attacks by the other group while leaving them vulnerable to their own attacks. And you can see this in voting rights, where the different groups try to attack and defend at the same time. And this is more about abstract principles, notions of equality, justice, and fairness. And this gets back to our definition of the word hack. When a lobbyist gets a law passed, have they hacked the system, or are they just using it as intended? All right, some more examples. Let's talk about hacks of cognitive systems. Remember the security adage that script kiddies hack computers while smart attackers hack people? Right? Lots of attackers hack people. Advertising is a hack of our cognitive system of choice. It's always been psychological, now it's scientific, now it's targeted. Lots of people have written about modern behavioral advertising and how it affects our ability to rationally choose. It feels like a hack to me. And kind of all of my market and democracy examples really bubble up to persuasion as a hack. Social media hacks our attention by manufacturing outrage, by being addictive. And AI and robotics are going to hack our cognitive systems, because we all have a lot of cognitive shortcuts. Right? 2 over 1 is a face. A face is a creature. Language indicates intelligence, emotion, intention, and so on. These are all really reasonable cognitive shortcuts for the environment we involved in, and they will all fail with artificial, people-like systems. All right, so this is a lot of examples, but I really want to give you a feel for sort of how I'm thinking about this. Let me talk about one thing in a little more detail. So last fall, I started using computer security techniques to study propaganda and misinformation. So I did this work with political scientist Henry Farrell at GW University. And sort of here's our thinking. Democracy can be thought of as an information system. And we're using that to understand the current waves of information attacks, specifically this question. How is it that the same disinformation campaigns that act as a stabilizing influence in a country like Russia can be destabilizing in the United States? And our answer is that autocracies and democracies work differently as information systems. All right, so let me explain. There are two types of knowledge that society uses to solve political problems. The first is what I call common political knowledge. That's information that society broadly agrees on. So it's things like who the rulers are, how they're chosen, how government functions. That's common political knowledge. Then there is contested political knowledge. And that's the stuff we disagree about. So it's things like, how much of a role should our government play in our economy? Right? What sorts of regulations are beneficial and what are harmful? What should the tax rates be? Right? That's the stuff we disagree about. That's contested political knowledge. So democracies and autocracies have different needs for common and contested political knowledge. Right? Democracies draw on disagreements within their populations to solve problems. That's how we work. But in order for it to work, there needs to be common political knowledge on how governments function and how political leaders are chosen. Right? We have to know how elections work so we can campaign for our side. And through that process, we solve political problems. In an autocracy, you need common political knowledge over who's in charge, but they tend to suppress other common political knowledge about how the government is actually working, about other political movements and their support. Right? They benefit from those things being contested. So that difference in information usage leads to a difference in threat models, which leads to a difference in vulnerabilities. So authoritarian regimes are vulnerable to information attacks that challenge their monopoly on common political knowledge. Right? That is why an open internet is so dangerous to an autocracy. Democracies are vulnerable to information attacks that turn common political knowledge into contested political knowledge, which is why you're seeing information attacks in the United States and Europe that try to cast doubt on the fairness of elections, the fairness of the police and courts, the fairness of the census. The same information attack, but they increase the stability in one regime and decrease the stability in another. Here's another way of saying this. There is something in political science called a dictator's dilemma, and it kind of goes like this. As a dictator, you need accurate information about how your country is running, but that accurate information is also dangerous because it tells everybody how not well your country is running. So you're always trying to balance this need for information with this need to suppress the information. There is a corresponding democracy's dilemma. And that's this. It's the same open flows of information that are necessary for democracy to function are also potential attack vectors. And so this feels like a useful way of thinking about propaganda. And it's something we're continuing to develop. So let's hack some other cognitive systems. Fear. I've written years ago that our sense of fear is optimized for living in small family groups in the East African highlands in 100,000 BC and are not well designed for 2020 San Francisco. Right? Terrorism directly targets our cognitive shortcuts about fear. It's terrifying, vivid, spectacular, random. It's basically tailor-made for us to exaggerate the risk and overreact. Right? Trust. Our intuitions are based on trusting individuals, peer-to-peer, trusting organizations, brands. It's not what we're used to. And this can be misused by others to manipulate us. We naturally trust authority. Something in print is an authority. The computer said so is an authority. Lots of examples of those trust heuristics being attacked. You can even think of junk food as hacking our biological systems of food desirability, because our security is based on our 100,000-year-old diet, not on modern processed food production. Now, a change in the threat model has led to a vulnerability. I think any industry that has been upended by technology is worth examining from this perspective. Right? Our system for choosing election officials, not voting specifically, but the election process in general, the news industry, distance learning and higher education. Any social system that has slipped into complexity is worthy of examination. The tech industry, of course, the media industry, financial markets. In all of these cases, differences in degree lead to differences in kind, and they have security ramifications. And we know this is true for mass surveillance. I think it's true for a lot of other things as well. Right, the ability of people to coordinate on the internet has changed the nature of attack. Remember the great, I don't know if it's great, the story of Microsoft's chatbot Tay, right, turned into a racist, misogynistic Nazi in less than 24 hours by a coordinated attack by 4chan. More recently, the people running the Democratic caucuses in Iowa didn't realize that publicizing their help number would leave them vulnerable to denial of service attack. Right? We've moved in a lot of places from good faith systems to ones where people and institutions behave strategically. And security against that stuff is what we're good at. I think power matters here. All of these hacks are about rearranging power, just as cryptography is about rearranging power. In her great book, Between Truth and Power, Julie Cohen, law professor, wrote that in the realm of government, power interprets regulation as damage and routes around it. Right? Once the powerful understood that they had to hack the regulatory process, they developed competence to do just that. And that impedes solutions. So elections are a good example. I've already mentioned money in politics is changing the threat model. So most US election spending takes place on television, secondarily on the internet. Now, there are ways to regulate this. Other countries restrict advertising to some small time window, and there are other things they do. But the platforms on which this debate would occur are the very ones that profit most from political advertising. And power will fight security if it's against their interests. Think about the FBI versus strong encryption. Those in power will fight to retain their power. All right, so one last concept I want to look at, the notion of a class break. And so in general, and we know the story, computers replace expertise and skill with an ability. You used to have to train to be a calligrapher. Now you can use any font you want. Right, driving is currently a skill. How long will that last? This is also true for security. Right, one expert finds a zero-day, publishes it. Now anyone can use it, especially if it's embedded in a software program. So this generalizes when you deal with complex socio-technical systems. Someone invented the double Irish with a Dutch sandwich. But now it's a class break. Once the loophole was found, any company can take advantage of it. Misinformation on social networks is a class break. Right? Russia might have invented the techniques, now everyone can do it. Different techniques of psychological manipulation are class breaks. The notion of a class break drastically changes how we need to think about risk. And I don't think that's something well understood outside of our world. So we also need to generalize the solutions we routinely use. I'll hit on a few of them. Transparency is a big one. And we see that in the greater world. Open government laws, mandatory public tax and informational filings, ingredient labels on products, right? Truth in lending statements on financial products reduce corporate excesses even if no one reads them. And I think we achieve a lot through transparency. We have other solutions in our tech toolkit. Defense in depth, compartmentalization, right? Isolation, segmenting, sandboxing, audit, incident response, patching. Iteration matters here. Right? We know we never actually solve a security problem, we iterate. Now, is there some way to iterate law, to have extensible law? Can we implement some rapid feedback in our laws and regulations? Resilience is an important concept. I mean, it's how we deal with systems on a continuous attack. which is the normal situation in social systems? So when I wrote Beyond Fear back in 2003, I gave 5 steps to evaluate a security system. What are you trying to protect? What are the risks? How well does your solution mitigate the risks? What other risks does your solution cause? And what are the non-security trade-offs? I think we can generalize that framework. Systems that are decentralized and multiply controlled, they're a lot harder to fix. But we have experience with that. We have a lot of experience with that. So all of this leads to some big questions. What should policy for the information economy look like? Right? What components will rule of law 2.0 have? What should economic institutions for the information economy look like? Right? Industrial area capitalism is looking increasingly unlikely. And how do we address the problems that are baked into our technological infrastructure without destroying what it provides? And one problem I see immediately is we don't have policy institutions with footprints to match the technologies. And Facebook is global, yet it's only regulated nationally. And those who have been around for a while remember when tech used to be the solution. Now it's the problem. In reality, it's both. And our problem tends to be social problems masquerading as tech problems and tech solutions masquerading as social solutions. And we need to better integrate tech and policy. Computer security has long integrated tech and people. I think we can do this for a much broader set of systems. I think we need to upend the idea that society is somehow solid, stable, and naturally just there. We build society. Increasingly, we build it with technology. And technology is not on some inevitable trajectory. It interacts with a country's political and social institutions. So it's not just one effect of technology. It depends on the details of society. Computer security has already had an impact on technology. And now we need to have an impact on the broader public interest. So this is what I'm working on right now. Currently, it is this talk. It'll probably become some articles and essays. Maybe it'll be a book. I think this framework has some value. It gives structure to thinking about adversaries inside a social system. How we delineate the rules of the game, how people hack the game, how they hack the metagame, and how we can secure all of that. So I think it's easy to get carried away with this kind of thinking. All models are wrong, but some are useful, is the great quote. Right? Which systems are analogous to network computers and which are not? When are innovations analogous to a hack with security implications, and when are they just novel uses, or innovations, or social progress? There are bugs in everything. When is a bug a vulnerability? When is a vulnerability deserving of attention? When is it catastrophic? It's probably a good analogy to cancer here. Right? Everyone has cancerous cells in their body all the time, but most cancers don't grow. It depends on the environment and other external factors. I think it's the same in our field. The difference, of course, is that cancer cells are not intelligent, malicious, adaptive adversaries. And that's who we're dealing with. So I also think it's important to have humility in this endeavor. I mean, all the examples I used are large policy issues with history and expertise and a huge body of existing knowledge. And we just can't think that we can barge in and solve the world's problems just because we're good at the problems in our own world. Right? The literature is filled with intellectuals who are experts in their field, overgeneralized, and fell flat on their face. I kind of want to avoid that. And the last thing we want is another tech can fix everything solution. Right? Especially coming from the monoculture of Silicon Valley. at the expense and lives of, like everybody else. I think we need a lot of people from a lot of disciplines working together to solve any of this, but I like tech to be involved in these broader conversations. So I once heard this quote about mathematical literacy. It's not that math can solve the world's problems, it's just that the world's problems would be easier to solve if everyone just knew a little more math. I think the same thing holds true for security. It's not that the security mindset or security thinking will solve the world's problems. It's just that the world's problems will be easier to solve if everyone just understood a little more security. And this is important. So I have one final example about the hack against the tax code. In January, the New York Times reported about this new kind of tax fraud. It's called cum-ex trading, which is Latin for with, without. And I'm going to read a sentence from the article. Through careful timing and the coordination of a dozen different transactions, cum-ex trades produced 2 refunds for dividend tax paid on 1 basket of stocks. So that's 1 refund obtained legally and the second illegally received. It was a hack. This was something the system permitted, unanticipated and unintended by the system's creators. 2006 to 2011, the bankers, lawyers, and investors who used this hack made off with $60 billion from EU countries. Right now, there are prosecutions, primarily in Germany, and it is unclear whether the law was broken. Right? The hack is permitted by the system. They're debating whether there is some meta system of like, don't do anything this blatantly horrible that they can like convict the person of, or we have a vulnerability in our laws that we need to patch. So a year ago, I stood on this same stage and talked about the need for public interest technologists. For technologists to understand the social ramifications of their work, for technologists to get involved in public policy, to bridge the gap between tech and policy. So this is a piece of it. Hacking society and securing against those hacks is how we in the computer security field can use our expertise for broader social progress. And I think we have to do that. So thank you. So I left a bunch of time for questions and comments because I really want questions and comments. This is a work in progress and something I'm thinking about. So I'm curious what you all think. There's 2 microphones that everyone is scared to get in front of. Here comes one person. And if you don't want to get on the microphone, email me. If you have an idea, a rebuttal, another example, send it to me. I'm really curious. I'll chase down the details. But anything that is sparked by this talk, please tell me. Yes?
So I like the idea of comparing the social systems to IT system when we come to securing both of those. However, I would like to get your opinion on what I call the permanent hack, wherein the society, through fear, alternative facts, and all these kind of things, move into a situation where the actual objectives of the system completely change, right? While in IT, we only have one variable where the system itself that we need to defend is very clear. And in society, the objective of what we're trying to do keep changing, right?
Yeah, so I think it's less different than you want. I mean, we like to think that our systems end at the keyboard and screen. But in fact, they don't. And we are used to systems, internet. Right? It was invented with one particular threat model, and that completely changed. And we have an internet designed for a very benign threat environment being used for critical infrastructure. So we're used to systems drift. I think we're used to systems that expand. We often don't think of them that way, but those of us, I think, who do security well are constantly thinking about that. But yes, I think there is a difference. That social systems tend to evolve more. They're not deliberately created. You know, who created the market economy? Well, it was kind of showed up when it was the right time. And we know who created our Constitution, and we can look at their debates and really learn about the threat model they were thinking about, the vulnerabilities they were looking at, what they missed. But I think you're right, that this is going to be a tough expansion because of those fuzzy borders. I'm not sure the answer, but I think it's still worth poking at.
Dan Woods from Early Adopter Research. Do you know of any book that explains the kind of basics of political theory from utilitarianism, Locke, Rousseau, all these things for technologists, so that this could be that they could then do a better job of mapping what we know to what the political and social
funny.
words and needs?
It's funny. I now teach the Harvard Kennedy School. I teach tech to policy kids, and we're constantly writing these papers like machine learning for policymakers. You want the other one, like social systems for techies. I don't know that. It's a great idea. So I have been reading political theory books. And the way you do this is you go online, look for political theory classes at universities, and buy their textbooks. So I've been reading a bunch, I don't remember names, but there are political theory books that are used in these undergraduate classes that go into all of that. They're not written for techies, they're written for humanities majors. But one for a tech, that's a great idea. If you need a project, I would love to read it.
Okay.
It's done.
I'll get started.
Okay. Let me know next year.
Hi, Bruce. Thank you for speaking today. My name is Alex Sarabrina. I'm currently a student at San Francisco State University, and I'm a political science major who specializes in terrorism.
All right, tell me why I'm all wrong.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that.
This is my nightmare scenario. Someone who knows something.
No, I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not going to tell you that. What I wanted to know is that you spoke about terrorism and attacks that seem to be random, but they're really not. How do you think we should prevent those attacks, especially if they use technology such as terrorist recruiting on, say, Twitter, for example?
I mean, so this is really not this topic of this talk, but the answer is you can't. I mean, random acts of violence cannot be prevented. And that's, in a sense, why it's so fearful. And unfortunately, I think the best we can do, well, a lot of what we do is we move it around. We block off certain techniques and targets and force the terrorists to choose other techniques and targets. And that largely doesn't work very well. We do a lot of stuff against airplanes because airplanes are a particularly disastrous target. Right? Bomb goes off in this room, and some people die, some people get injured, everyone else is okay. Bomb goes off on this airplane, and the airplane crashes, we all die. So that, but it has a particular failure mode, which is why that is protected more than other things. Once you get out of airplanes, you're just moving around what the terrorists are doing, and that sends you upstream to geopolitical solutions very quickly. That the rest of the money is just expended in forcing the bad guys to change their tactics and target. See there?
Hi. When we are talking about security and securing organizations and systems, we often raise up the security awareness. What about here, if we try to secure the society? What about the awareness of the people and how to raise their level of education? Because with low level of education, they certainly are target to different kind of hacks like disinformation and stuff like that.
So I think that's interesting. I haven't done a lot of thinking about awareness as a security measure. I should. So off the top of my head, a lot of these attacks aren't attacks against the user. They're more attacks against the code. It'd be interesting to think about what are attacks against the users in these social systems. And if we have those, how much is awareness going to be a defense? So maybe an example might be nutritional labels. Right? If high fructose corn syrup is a hack against our biological need for quick energy, and our nutritional labels and some kind of literacy or education solution. So that's where I'd look. My guess is it's part of it. I tend not to be a big fan in our field of education as a solution. I mean, I want our systems to work even with an educated user. And I think this is just sophistication of our field. Like the early automobiles were sold with a toolkit and a repair manual. Now they're not. Now everybody can drive. You don't need to be an expert in internal combustion to drive a car. And you shouldn't need to be an expert in anything to use a computer. So I want the fixes more embedded in the system than to rely on the user. But that's worth thinking about in these broader socials because they are so much more user-focused than a tech system. So thank you for that. Something to think about. Yes?
Some very interesting ideas. Tech security folks are very good at spotting problems, very good at coming up with solutions. But what you haven't talked about is how are we going to get that bell, that terrific bell on that cat? I mean, because we're not the people, usually, who have the power or the influence to implement it.
What I want is more techies in the room. I mean, this is really what I push in public interest tech. Right now, we don't. We are not involved in the conversations. And I think we can contribute to these conversations. Right? Last year, we had a sitting U.S. senator in a public hearing ask Mark Zuckerberg this question: how does Facebook make money? Right? On the one hand, my God, you don't know. And two, no one on your staff told you that was a stupid question? So, like, the bar is really low here. And we need to do better. How? You know, I don't have a good answer. I think we're trying a lot of things. But yes, I think that is a big part of the solution, getting technologists involved in public policies, because all of these problems have some tech component. So it's not a great answer. It's what I got for you. I think the next person.
Hi, my name is Logan. I'm a researcher in both government and computer science at Georgetown University. I really like this paradigm. I think it's very fascinating. However, just off your talk, it seems like it's focused on, ironing out the kinks and the bugs in systems. But when you look at how entrenched some of these broader socio-political systems are, some of them may be flawed to the core. So are you worried that this paradigm may focus more on just ironing out the bumps when some of the systems may need to be replaced entirely?
Yeah, so that's a good comment. I mean, and you're right. In computer security, we tend to iron out the bumps. That's what we do. Rarely do we say, the internet is fundamentally broken, make a new one. Right? And if we say that, people look at you and say, are you an idiot? That's never going to happen. So I think this kind of thinking is about the bumps. I mean, you're right. We're not going to fix the broad structural issues with this kind of thinking. That takes sort of another level of abstraction. Am I worried that this will obscure that? I'm not. I think both are a thing, and we have to deal with them. Society is terrible at making broad structural changes. I don't think I can fix that. But in the absence of that, I think starting to think about what power is doing as hacking and how they're exploiting as vulnerabilities, I think that will go some way to changing the way we think of the dynamic. Hopefully that will help. But you make a very good point.
Thank you.
All right, you're my last question.
Hi, I'm Tom Sego, CEO of Blastwave, and my question is really around incentives and purpose. And I kind of see two broad groups, one in which one group's trying to gain and leverage power, right, and maximize what they can do with that power, and then the other group is trying to immunize the system from these hacks. They're trying to make it invulnerable. And I'm curious, how do you deal with those different types of opposing purposes? There's no single requirements document that we've all agreed upon.
Right, and I think that's what I talk about in that these systems evolve. It's not like we have a spec we can look at, although there are vulnerabilities in specs too. Yeah. So I don't know if I have a good answer. That's a good question, and I think this might speak to the edges of where my generalization starts failing. What do we do when there isn't a consensus on what the system is supposed to do? And I think I got to that when I talked about VC funding. Is that a hack or not? From this perspective, it is. From that perspective, it's just that's the way the system works. Are lobbyists a hack? Well, yeah, kind of, but no, that's how we get laws passed. So I don't know. I mean, as I flesh this out, I'm going to have to be a little more rigid, but I think there's value in having a squishy definition. I mean, you can claim legitimately that gay marriage is a hack. I mean, it's taking this particular system and we're going to use it in this new way. Now, a lot of us think that's a great idea, but it was a hack. So is that good or bad? Well, there are good hacks. The question is now, what is this supposed to do? What are its goals? Who's society? And that's where that gets embedded. So I don't have a good answer, but that's a good question.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I wasn't taking notes. Can you email me that question again? Just send me an email.
Yeah,
Thank you. All right, I have to leave the stage. Thank you all. Any other questions, comments, suggestions for examples, things to look at, places where I'm completely wrong, please email me, because I want to keep thinking about this. Thanks all. Have a great conference. I'll see you next year.